So, a lot of you will know, because I've said it before, most people walk into family court thinking the battle is about proving who is right, who lied, who cheated, who blocked contact, who caused the damage, who is the narcissist, who is the victim, who is the villain. And I listen. I understand why people do that. I did it. When you have been hurt, when you feel replaced, pushed out, accused, ignored, or treated like someone optional in your own child's life, of course, you want someone to hear your pain. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Family court is not built around your pain. It's built around your child's welfare. And that means the question is not simply who is to blame. The deeper question is who is taking responsibility for the child's emotional world? Because that is the shift. That is the family court shift from blame to responsibility. And if parents, professionals, cafcass officers, policymakers, clinicians, educators, and judges do not understand this properly, we will keep producing children who are legally processed but emotionally abandoned. Children do not grow up healthy because adults argue about their rights. Children grow up healthy because the adults around them are physically present, emotionally present, consistent, safe, attuned, and responsive. That is not soft parenting waffle. That is child development. That is attachment. That is emotional regulation. That is brain development. A child's mental health is not created when they turn 18 and suddenly discover a mindfulness app and a podcast about trauma. It starts from the very beginning. It starts in the home. It starts in the arms, the voice, the face, the nervous system, and the emotional availability of the parents, the adults around them. Because for a child, especially a young child, you're not just their parent. You are their environment. You are the climate they grow in. You are the emotional weather. You are the place where the nervous system learns whether the world is a safe place or not, whether it's dangerous or not. And this matters most because the critical periods of brain development, the first major window is from birth to around 3 years old. That is when the foundations are being laid. The foundations for attachment, the foundations for trust, the foundations for emotional regulation, the foundations for how that child will later handle stress, rejection, conflict, fear, disappointment, and the separation. The second major window is adolescence, roughly from 9 through to about the mid-20s. That is another huge period of brain development. That is when identity forms, risk-taking increases, emotions become more intense, peer influence becomes stronger. The child starts asking, who am I? Where do I belong? Am I safe? Am I loved? Do I matter? So when adults disappear emotionally or weaponize the children or reduce parenting into winning, losing, blaming, blocking, punishing, or proving a point, children do not just get over it, they adapt. And sometimes that adaptation looks like anxiety. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like school problems. Sometimes it looks like loyalty conflict. Sometimes it looks like rejecting one parent. Sometimes it looks like people pleasing. Sometimes it looks like depression. Sometimes it does not show up until adolescence, when everyone suddenly says, where did this come from? Well, often it did not come from nowhere. It came from the years of emotional instability, fractured attachment, adult conflict, fear, inconsistency, and children being asked directly or indirectly to carry adult pain. Now, this is where family court often gets it wrong, because family court loves evidence, messages, statements, allegations, schedules, reports, position statements, bundles, orders, directions, and all of that matters. Of course it matters. You need evidence, you need structure, you need proper documents, you need to know how to present your case. But if we only ask what happened between the adults and we do not ask what is happening inside the child, then we are missing the point. A child is not just a contact schedule. A child is not just a paragraph in a cafcass report. A child is not just a handover arrangement. A child is not just a name on a court order. A child is a developing nervous system. A child is a developing brain. A child is a developing sense of self. A child is constantly asking without having the words, am I safe? Am I wanted? Can I love both my parents? Will I be punished for missing dad? Will mum be upset if I enjoy seeing him? Does dad still love me if I say no? Why are the adults around me so angry? Is this my fault? And that is where the real damage happens. Not always in the dramatic moments, sometimes in the repeated emotional atmosphere. The eye roll when dad's name is mentioned, the silence under contact, the interrogation after a weekend, the child being treated like a spy, the child learning that love has consequences, the child becoming responsible for an adult's emotional comfort, That is not co-parenting. That is emotional pollution. And children breathe it in. This is why attachment security matters. Attachment security is not about being a perfect parent, thank God, because most of us would be finished by Tuesday. Attachment security means the child has a reliable emotional base, someone who sees them, someone who hears them, someone who regulates them, someone who repairs after rupture, someone who dares not make the child responsible for adult wounds, someone who can say, I am angry, but I will not make you carry it. That is what children need. They need physical presence, yes, but they also need emotional presence, because you can be in the same room and still be absent. You can be sitting next to your child while still scrolling through your phone, drowning in bitterness, obsessing over the court case, raging about the other parent, and emotionally unavailable. And you can also be miles away, fighting for contact, but still emotionally present through consistency, cards, letters, calm messages, memories, photographs, appropriate reassurance, and never giving up on the relationship. Physical presence matters, emotional presence matters. Both matter. But in family court, many parents focus only on how many nights have I got? How many hours do I have? What's the percentage? Is it 50-50? And yes, time does matter. Children need meaningful time with safe, loving parents. But time without emotional safety is not enough. And emotional love without practical presence is not enough either. Children need both adults to show up, not just in court, not just on Facebook, not just when there's an audience. They need adults to show up in the boring, repetitive, exhausting, ordinary parts of childhood. Homework, bedtime, school shoes, dentist, appointments, nightmares, packed lunches, meltdowns, football boots, forgotten PE kits, questions in the car, awkward teenage silences. That is parenting, not the courtroom performance, the daily presence. And this brings me to responsibility. Responsibility does not mean you caused everything. Responsibility does not mean the other parent has done nothing wrong. Responsibility does not mean accepting false allegations. Responsibility does not mean tolerating alienation. Responsibility does not mean being passive. Responsibility means asking, what can I do now that protects my child's welfare? What can I control? How do I present myself? How do I communicate? How do I reduce conflict? How do I become emotionally safer? How do I show the court that I understand my child's needs, not just my own pain? That is the shift. Blame says she ruined everything. Responsibility says I am concerned about the impact of these behaviors on the child, and I am proposing a practical, child-focused way forward. Blame says she is a narcissist. Responsibility says there are repeated behaviors causing emotional pressure on the child, and here is the evidence. Blame says no one listens to fathers. Responsibility says I need to present my case clearly, calmly, and with evidence focused on the welfare. Blame says my child has been stolen from me. Responsibility says my child needs a safe route back into a relationship with me without being placed under further emotional pressure. That is not weakness. That is strategy. That is maturity. That is how you become credible, because judges are not just listening to what you say, they're watching how you think. They're watching whether you can separate your pain from the child's needs. They are watching whether you are asking for revenge or repair. They are watching whether you are still parenting even under pressure. And this is not just for parents. This message is also for professionals, for policymakers, for clinicians, for educators, for anyone making decisions about children. We have a global mental health crisis. Children are breaking down, anxiety, depression, behavioral problems, ADHD-type presentations, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, school refusal, emotional dysregulation. And yes, sometimes there are biological factors. Yes, I get it. Sometimes medication may have a role. Yes, therapy can help. But if the only answer is medication and short-term therapy after a child has already broken down, then we are not preventing fires. We are arriving after the house is smoking and saying, has anyone tried a worksheet? CBT may help some children. Medication may help some children. But we have to ask deeper questions. Where does emotional regulation come from? Where does resilience come from? Where does it begin? What kind of adult presence helps a child tolerate stress? What happens when a child grows up in chronic conflict? Now, let me say something. All these charities, Fathers for Justice, PAPA, Families Need Fathers, every single one of you, every one of you, and I've been guilty of it in the past. You say you're helping men. You want to make change. Or you're doing the opposite. You're keeping men angry. You're not giving the right information out. And then they're going into court and screwing things up. If you have influence, and a lot of you lot have, but the only reason you have influence is because you keep people angry. and you're not giving them the right answers. If you were giving them the right boring answers, you wouldn't have your likes that you go for. That's the reality. I'll tell you why you're not giving them the solutions, shall I? Because you don't know the solutions. You've created your businesses, your charities, your whatever it is, based on your own personal experiences. And if it was bad, your personal experience, you'll teach everyone about your bad experience and how everything's bad. But if you had a good experience, you'd be teaching them good things. The difference between you lot and me is I've done the bad stuff. I behave badly in family court. I'm aware that I behave badly. And I guarantee you, anyone who's had a bad experience in family court, you've behaved badly in family court. And it doesn't mean courts have behaved honourably or without criticism themselves, but you've reacted. And now you're teaching people how to do the same thing because you don't know how to do it right. You don't know how to get through family court successfully. You've never done it, so you can't teach it, unlike some. So I'll leave it there. But then what happens when a child's attachment system is repeatedly threatened? What happens when a child learns that loving one parent betrays the other? What happens when adults prioritize careers, conflict, status, new relationships, material, success, personal pleasure, courtroom victory? What's the other one? When you're protesting, changing the system. When we prioritize all those needs, over the emotional needs of the child. That is the question nobody likes asking because it points back to us. It points back to adult responsibility. And adults are brilliant at demanding children become resilient while refusing to become responsible. Pointing the finger of blame. Someone else's fault. Always someone else's fault. No one wants to look in the mirror and say, well, you actually did wrong. What you've contributed to your own child's poor behavior, it's on you. We prioritize everything: work, money, careers, relationships, new partners, status, arguments, phones, court battles, being right, looking good, winning. But children need prioritization, not as a slogan, not as a line in a witness statement, not as something we say while doing the opposite. Actual prioritization. The kind where you regulate yourself before speaking. The kind where you do not use your child as a messenger. The kind where you do not interrogate them after contact. The kind where you do not make them feel guilty for loving the other parent. The kind where you do not confuse your hurt with their welfare. The kind where you understand that your child's future mental health may depend not whether you won the argument, but whether you become safe enough for them to stay emotionally whole. That is the responsibility. That is the shift. And it is not easy because blame feels powerful. Blame gives you a target. Blame gives you a villain. Blame gives you emotional fuel. Responsibility is much harder. Responsibility asks you to grow up while you are grieving. Responsibility asks you to stay calm while you are being misrepresented. Responsibility asks you to think strategically when your nervous system wants to scream. Responsibility asks you to protect your child from the very conflict that is breaking your heart. That is not weakness. That is fatherhood. That is motherhood. That is parenting. That is leadership. So if you are in family court right now, I want you to ask yourself one brutal question. Am I presenting as a blaming parent or a responsible parent? Not because the other parent is innocent, and not because the system is perfect, and not because cafcass always gets it right, and not because judges always see everything. They do not. But because your credibility matters, your emotional control matters, and your child does not just need you to fight. They need you to become safe, stable, consistent, and emotionally present enough to help them recover. Because the strongest position in family court does not start with the loudest accusation. It starts with the strongest version of you, the regulated version, the prepared version, the child-focused version, the version that says, I will not let this process turn me into someone my child needs protection from. That is the family court shift from blame to responsibility, from rage to regulation, from victimhood to strategy, from adult conflict to child welfare, from proving a point to protecting a child. And that's where real change begins. Now, if this message hit home, subscribe to Family Court Mastery with Jason Appleyard. That's this new channel. We were the Alienated Dads Network. This channel is here to help separated fathers and parents, mums, navigate family court, cafcass parent alienation, allegations, and high conflict co-parenting with clarity, strategy, emotional control, and child-focused credibility. Because your pain may explain where you are, but your responsibility is what helps you move forward. Buongiorno.